Hello again. In this part of the video, we're gonna discuss inference-based questions in paired passages. Now we already know on the SAT evidence-based reading test, we got 5 passages, one of which is a paired passage. Paired passage consists of 2 passages that are talking about the same topic, and the questions associated to this type of passages have to do with the organization of the passage, the relationship between a paragraph and another, the relationship between the 2 passages, and of course these type of questions have to do with inferencing, meaning concluding. Concluding depends on your analytical skills. You have to read between the lines. You have to be able to deduce the meaning of a certain concept or get the main idea off of what you have read or off of what is suggested by the passage but not directly stated. So some of the ideas are not directly there. They're not worded in words. They're not stated in words, but you can deduce the meaning through the word choice, the evidence given, or by actually just looking at or being familiar with the organization of the passage. For example, if at first or if the passage given is a persuasive type of writing, then most probably the writer will start off with his claim. He will support it, and then he will discuss the counter argument, tackle its benefits, and go over it briefly, and then he will show the reader where he stands and why his choice is better than the others or better than the opponents. So this is like an insight on a relationship related question. Now let's get into inferencing and questions that are associated with paired passages. We're going to talk about these two simultaneously, like at the same time. So usually these type of questions are attached to paired passages. They make literal comprehension a less straightforward matter than it is on the rest of the reading test, meaning they complicate things for the reader or for the test taker, because they always use archaic language or language that is old-fashioned and somehow dated, and the structure they use is quite pertains to the 18th century, meaning it's quite old-fashioned. Mainly because it tackles historical events, topics, and so. So the only way to deal with these kind of questions is by breaking them down carefully, which can serve in making them doable and manageable. You are probably better off using the time you would have spent on them to answer other more straightforward questions. So the thing is that you always start off with something that you are rather familiar with, something that is easy topic, easy passage, easy questions, and then you put anything that is difficult and hard to deal with or complex on hold, and once you got the time, you get back to these difficult questions and deal with them deliberately. So these passages are relevant to excerpts from 19th century American documents presenting conflicting views on some aspect of equality or social political rights, most frequently involving the status of women and African Americans. So all the topics discussed here are relevant to the culture of America, the US or the United States of America. Okay, it could be an independence declaration, or a speech on women's rights, or African American rights, or Indian American people and their right to or their right for land ownership. So all of these topics pertain to the American society. Up next, we're going to get more into the questions. So these questions may use more abstract, something that is not tangible, or confusing language, complex language, instead of asking you to identify a contrast or disagreement, requiring you to identify the central tension or conflict between the passages. So they intentionally use these confusing words, but once you identify with these, so using these words is actually equivalent to using these words as well, but these are like quite direct and more like clear to the reader. However, these could be confusing, like what do we mean by central tension? Okay, tension implies like two things that are going into the opposite direction. That's what we've learned in physics, right? The central tension. So what is the conflicting point in this passage? Like the point that two parties are disagreeing on, or one is disagreeing and one is approving. So all of these words are actually asking for the same actual thing. Do not let the phrasing fool you into thinking that you are being asked to do something very complicated. Instead, stay focused on the fact that you are simply being asked to recognize what major point the authors of the passages disagree about. Okay? Here we are explaining this point. Okay? Using complex language that is quite confusing and ambiguous, but it should not fool you because it's actually asking for a very simple thing, which is it is asking you to recognize the point where the authors are disagreeing. Now, as you read, you should also make sure to note any major stylistic differences between the passages. For example, stylistic differences, the point of view, the choice of words. So stylistic has to do with the style. Is it in the third person? Is it in the first person? Is the writer is the narrator? Or is he like discussing the topic from a third point of view? Like he's not attached to the story or to the topic in discussion. So here we have to pay attention to what we call stylistic differences. Okay, choice of words. The theme of the passage is a stylistic attribute. Meaning, so if the theme is dark and gloomy in the first passage, then it would be like vivid, colorful, and lively. So here he is using like dark language. For example, it's dark humor. He's indicating sadness, for example, and here like the tone shifted. It became more vivid. He's more in favor of happiness or of joy. So he has to use some sort of words to indicate that. Okay, and these words are indicators of shift in tone, because in the previous or in the preceding passage he was dark and gloomy and sad, and then for some sort of reason he started acting like in the opposite direction, or he started taking the opposite direction. So stylistic differences, and here's an example. So one passage is written from a first person perspective, which is I, while the other is written from an objective third person, he, she, it stance. If so, then the first passage is by definition more personal, because I is involved. So for example, I love this and that, I disapprove on this and that. Okay, so here it has to do with the opinion of the author, so it's more like a subjective point of view. It's quite not reliable, and it has to do with the feelings of the author himself. However, when we use she, he, it, third person pronouns, it's rather more reliable, because the author is detaching himself from the passage or from the story. So he's no longer here, he's just discussing this topic with a more like a neutral tone or detached objective attitude. Let's move on and see what's next. So we're still talking about relationship questions. For example, like answers could be as follow. Passage 1 and passage 2 agree but have different, not necessarily opposing, and focuses or have different focuses or stylistic differences. Okay? Or passage 1 and passage 2 discuss different aspects of the same event or idea. So in the first passage, they the author discussed or talked about, let's say, the effect of air conditioner on the skin of people, for example. Okay, and here the other author started talking about the causes of skin diseases, for example. So it's the same aspect of that has to do with skin care, but here we talked about effects, and there we talked about the causes. So two different aspects, okay, two different phases of the same topic. Passage 2 provides an example of an idea described generally in passage 1. So let's say passage 1 is introducing a concept or an idea or a subject, and in passage 2 there is like rather an elaboration or an explanation of this concept or this argument. So it's providing like examples, supporting details. It's like just putting emphasis on the idea discussed previously in the preceding passage. Okay. So these are like all types of relationships, okay, that we have to consider when having two passages or a paired passage. Passage 2 provides an explanation for a phenomenon discussed in passage 1. So this is another type of relationship. This is just to give you an insight on what relationship stands for in this context, of course. How to read paired passages. Now here's the thing, in a nutshell, clearly mark the questions. Mark the questions that ask about passage 1 only, the ones that ask about passage 2 only, and the ones that ask about both passages. Okay, so first thing first, look through the questions relevant to these paired passages. Okay. Identify with the ones that has to do with only one passage, and then mark or highlight the ones or the questions that are relevant to both passages, like they're asking about the relationship between the two passages. Okay. Read passage 1, write main idea plus tone. So you have to decide what is this passage is about. Remember, we ask who is it about and what is it about? What is it talking about, the subject? Okay. So who is it about? Maybe it's about women. What is it talking about women? Women's right to vote, for example. So in the first passage, the author was an advocate of allowing women to vote, and in the second passage, the author or the other author is disapproving of this notion. He doesn't want to grant women the right to vote, for example. So two opposing ideas, two central conflicts or central tension, like the discussion that is happening here. So you basically do the same for passage 2 as well. Write main point plus tone, and then, since it's the second and the last passage, you decide on the relationship between two. The relationship between passage 1 and passage 2. Here you answer passage 2 questions and then answer passage 1 or passage 2 relationship questions. And this is it for reading the passages. Let's see what's next. Now, here's the thing. It's noteworthy that breaking down these questions will help you on the long run. So how do you do that? You reread the lines in question and sum up the idea in your own words. So remember, there's always like a line reference in each question. They will ask you, for example, in line 11 on the passage, blah 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 was discussed, what is the relationship? So you go to line 11 in the passage. Here's the passage, for example, here's line 11. So you read line 11. Okay, you reread it and you sum up the idea in your own word. For example, oh, so this sentence is talking about women's right in America and how hard to stand for this cause back in the day. Okay. For example, something like that. Use your own words, it's fine, as long as you're understanding the text. Then, after rereading the line or the specific line you are assigned to read or line in question, reiterate the main point of the other passage. Okay? Now this has to do with also looking at the main point of the other passage. Okay? So you decided the first you decided the main idea from the line given, and then you decide on the main idea of the whole passage. Then you determine whether the authors would agree or disagree. So is author number 1 is aligned with author number 2 claim, like they're both on the same page, on the same side, they're standing for the same cause, or they're like disagreeing, each one is taking a different side or a different corner, that to the extent that both corners cannot meet at a certain point, because they are going in the opposite directions, they are opposing one another, they're discrediting one another. Okay, then look at the answers. If the authors would agree, eliminate all negative options. Here we're back to negative, playing on the negative positive role. So whenever we encounter the fact that the author is opposing, so he has to have some sort of negative perspective. So we look at the negative options, okay, and we exclude the positive ones, and vice versa, like the opposite is actually correct. So if the author is a proponent, like he is an advocate or a supporter of a certain idea, supporting an idea requires positivity, so most probably the answers should be positive as well. Okay, and last but not least, check the remaining answers against the passage, focusing on the most specific part of each answer. Here, after you decide the tone of the writer, and you rephrase the main idea with it using your own words, okay, and you determined whether the topic here discussed is being disagreed on or agreed on. Last but not least, you should look at certain parts or certain indicators in the answer themselves. Remember, after excluding like the positive answers or the negative answers, you dissect or you go over each answer that you are left with thoroughly and deliberately. And this is it for relationship and inferencing types of questions.